From your address, the West is trying to drag us into a new arms race, to wear us down and repeat the trick that they successfully used in the 1980s with the USSR. How much margin of safety do we have here amid an arms race?
We need to get the maximum return on every ruble invested in defense. Indeed, the Soviet Union was not thrifty about military spending, and unfortunately, efficiency was not top priority. Defense spending was about 13% of the GDP back then. I will not cite our data, let us quote the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Last year, our defense spending was 4%, and this year it is 6.8%. So we have gone up by 2.8 percentage points. In principle, this is a noticeable increase, but it is absolutely not critical. Well, in the Soviet Union, it was 13%. And we are now at 6.8%. I must say that defense spending boosts and reinvigorates the economy. But of course, there are limits, and we are aware of that. This goes back to the guns versus Buta dilemma, although I repeat that our modern defense industry is a boon for the economy. Apart from an implicit impact on civilian industries, it harnesses the innovations needed for defense to produce civilian products. This is so crucial. But first of all, our spending, of course, is just a drop compared with that of the United States. 800 billion.
$900 billion, yes.
860, 870 billion, yes, it's absolutely not comparable to our spending.
I think there's a lot of embezzlement and kickbacks going on there because they don't have hypersonic weapons or whatever.
Here's what this is all about. They spend a huge amount of money on maintaining their military, and not only on pay, but also on the maintenance of bases around the world. It's like a black hole, really. You can't count how much you spend, actually. That's where the bulk of the money is siphoned off. Although the production of lethal weapons and armaments in general takes so much money that is difficult to estimate, take, for example, their widely advertised missile defense and our intercontinental missile avant-garde, one of the main components that we may use to overcome their missile defense. The costs are simply not comparable, and we have essentially neutralized their advantages and investment in the missile defense. This is how we need to act, but of course, without any doubt, the economics of our armed forces must meet the requirements of the modern world.
Historically, it's quite obvious that Nazi regimes do not disappear on their own, but as a result of military defeat. This was the case in Germany, in Italy, and in Japan. The same will obviously be true of the Bandera Nazi regime in Ukraine. And now we are advancing all along the front line, judging by the reports from both the Ministry of Defense and our war correspondents. Still, has it been possible to find a fighting tactic where we can sustain fewer losses on the offensive rather than in defense? I admit it is quite a non-trivial task for the war strategists, but it always holds back the offensive. I mean, sparring our heroic soldiers, how can we advance with minimum casualties?
It is a valid and legit question, but the answer is also simple. We need to increase the destructive power of our weapons, as well as their number and the efficiency of our personnel and assets. It also involves tactical and army aviation, even our strategic air force. Certainly it shall apply to those components that are suitable for armed conflicts of this kind. These are ground-based weapons, including high-precision weapons, artillery, and armored vehicles. And we are enhancing our capabilities by leaps and bounds.
In this area?
Yes, that is exactly what is happening. That is the answer to your question. The more powerful and the greater amounts of weapons we have, the fewer the casualties.
But it still begs the question of what price we are willing to pay for the whole project. Well, maybe the word does not fit in here, but for this historic challenge that we have been forced to face.
Every human life is priceless, every single one. And the loss of a loved one for a family, for any family, is a tremendous grief. But the question boils down to our mission and how we define it. What is our mission? During our meeting earlier, one of the participants talked about the surprise that they experienced when they learned that these territories are home to Russians just like us. We came to help these people. That's basically the answer to the question. If we abandon these people today, our losses could increase many times over tomorrow, and our children will have no future because we will feel insecure, we will be a third or fourth class country, and no one will respect us if we cannot defend ourselves. And the consequences could be catastrophic for the Russian statehood. That's the answer.
Mr. Putin, the Americans seem to talk about negotiations, about strategic stability, but at the same time they declare the need to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Our position is that we are open to negotiations, but at the same time, the time for goodwill gestures has passed. So will there be no negotiations?
We have never refused to negotiate.
Without goodwill gestures, without compromise, what will it look like then?
I will try to explain. We had negotiations in Istanbul. Turkey, I have already said this many times. I have to repeat it again. I will do it. What's more, the negotiators from the other side, and we came up with a thick volume, a document, actually a treaty, a draft treaty. And the extract from this treaty, it is available, it was initialed by the head of the negotiating group from the Ukrainian side, Mr. Arahamia. He did it, it has his signature. Here we have it in the executive office. But then it is known, as Mr. Arahamia himself told the world publicly, also at a meeting with journalists, including foreign journalists, that the former British Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, came and dissuaded them to finally sign and respectively execute this agreement and raise the topic that you have just mentioned, that Russia needs to be defeated on the battlefield. Are we ready for negotiations? Yes, we are ready, but only ready for negotiations, not based on some desires after the use of psychotropic drugs, but based on the realities that have evolved, as they say in such cases, on the ground. That is the first thing. Secondly, we have been promised many times that NATO will not expand to the east, and then we see them at our borders. They promised, if we do not go too deep into history, that the internal conflict in Ukraine would be resolved peacefully, politically. As we remember, 3 foreign ministers came to Kyiv from Poland, Germany, and France. They promised that they would be guarantors of these agreements. A day later, there was a coup d'etat. They promised to fulfill the Minsk agreements, and then publicly announced that they were not going to fulfill these promises, but only took a pause to arm the Banderite regime in Ukraine. We were promised a lot of things, so promises alone are not enough. To negotiate now only because they are running out of ammunition is somehow ridiculous on our part. Nevertheless, we are ready for a serious conversation, and we want to resolve all conflicts, and particularly this conflict, by peaceful means. But we must clearly and distinctly understand that this is not a pause that the enemy wants to take for rearmament, but a serious conversation with guarantees for the security of the Russian Federation. And we are aware of the various options that are being discussed. We know the carrots that are going to be shown to us in order to convince us that the right moment has come. We want, I repeat once again, to resolve all disputes, and this dispute, this conflict in particular, by peaceful means. And we are ready for that. We want to do that. But it should be a serious conversation with security assurances for the warring party. In this case, we are primarily interested in the security of the Russian Federation. We will proceed from this premise.
Mr. Putin, I think we are looking a little too noble. Will it turn out that they will once again deceive us, and we will console ourselves with the fact that we are honest, that they have deceived us, that it is our destiny to remain fools all the time? But ever since the Americans minted medals in the 90s for winning the Cold War, all these decades have been decades of big lies. How can we even hope that they will go and finally make an honest deal with us that they will honor, and with guarantees for us? How do you even deal with them? Do you really believe that this is possible?
I hate to say it, but I don't believe anyone. But we need guarantees, and the guarantees must be spelled out. They must be guarantees that would suit us and that we would believe in. This is what we are talking about. But now it is probably premature to talk publicly about what it could be. But absolutely, we're not buying any kind of just empty messages.
I'm afraid you're going to be quoted in an expansive way. Do you trust no one at all? Or are you referring to Western partners in this case when you say you trust no one?
I prefer to be guided by facts rather than by well-meaning statements and talk about trusting everyone. You see, when you make a decision at this level, the degree of responsibility for the consequences of the decision is very high. That is why we will not do anything that is not in the interests of our country.
By the way, what is wrong with President Macron? Has he completely lost his mind? He said he's going to send French troops to fight us, and now he looks like a Gaelic rooster getting ready for a cockfight, scaring the daylights out of Europeans. How do we even respond to this?
The thing is, Western militaries have been present in Ukraine for years now, going back as early as the pre-coup Ukraine, although after the coup their numbers have grown exponentially. These days Westerners get involved in the conflict both openly, as military advisors, and as foreign mercenaries. They are suffering losses. But if we talk about foreign troops being sent there officially by foreign countries, I am convinced that it will not change the reality on the battlefield, and that is what matters. Just like arms deliveries, this never changed a thing. My second point is, this can lead to major geopolitical consequences. Say, Polish troops enter the territory of Ukraine with the stated goal of covering the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, or take positions in other areas to give Ukrainian troops some breathing space to engage in combat operations on the line of contact. Should that happen, I don't think that Polish troops would ever want to leave. But that's just my guess. Because they will want to recover that's their dream, you see, to recover the lands that they consider historically Polish, lands that were once taken from them by the father of nations, Joseph Stalin, and handed over to Ukraine. Of course they want them back. If Polish military units enter these areas, they are never going to leave. But then other countries could follow suit, those that lost some of their territories as a result of World War II. And I think that Ukraine would have to face very serious geopolitical consequences, including some that could threaten its statehood in its current iteration.
Going back to Emmanuel Macron, could it be that he decided to take revenge on Russia after we stepped on his toes in Africa, instead of just sitting there and taking it like good little boys? He probably didn't expect us to be so assertive, did he?
Yes, I think it might well be some grudge on his part. But when we were in direct contact with him, we spoke quite openly about this subject. We didn't go into Africa and we didn't try to drive France out of the continent. The problem lies elsewhere. It has to do with the famous Wagner Group. At first, it carried out a number of economic operations in Syria, and then it moved to other countries in Africa. The defense ministry assisted them in some ways, but only based on the fact that it was a Russian group, nothing more. We never pushed anyone out of Africa. It's simply the matter of African leaders signing contracts with Russian authorized economic operators, wanting to do business with them and not wanting to do business with the French. In fact, it wasn't even our own initiative. It was our African friends who brought it up. Why would anyone hold a grudge against us for that? I have no idea. If an independent state wants to develop relations with its foreign partners, including Russia, if it wants to build ties with Russia, we didn't touch any of the former French colonizers in these African countries. And I'm being completely serious here because in many former French colonies, people don't really enjoy doing business with their former masters. And it has nothing to do with us, nothing whatsoever. Oh, it must be convenient to take offense at someone while also ignoring your own faults. Perhaps this acute and rather emotional reaction on the part of the French president has to do with the ongoing developments in some of the African countries. Although I do know that some African states see the presence of the French as completely normal and say that yes, they are ready to work with the French, while some countries don't want to. But it has nothing to do with Russia. We're not inciting anything or pitting anyone against France. That's never been a goal for us. To be honest, we don't even have a specific state-level policy to develop stronger ties with Africa. We're just friends, and that's all. They want to build deeper relations with us. We welcome that, and we're always ready to meet them halfway. There is nothing to be upset about.
Now they say in France that there are no more red lines left with regard to Russia, that nothing is off the table, that everything is possible. We hear how they want to speak with us in terms of a balance of power, and we hear a lot of weird things coming from France, from the West in general, from Lithuania. The voices are somewhat dissonant, but overall the chorus sounds hostile. Perhaps we too could go for an unconventional option and invite, say, the 2 million strong North Korean army in exchange for our nuclear umbrella over half the Korean peninsula. Why not?
For one thing, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has its own nuclear umbrella. They haven't asked for our help in that respect. Secondly, as we see it today, based on the progress we've made on the battlefield, we are quite capable of accomplishing the tasks that we set for ourselves. As for the countries that claim they have no red lines in dealing with Russia, they should realize that Russia, likewise, will not have any red lines in dealing with them. As for the smaller states in Europe, first off, we treat them all with respect, no matter what. And secondly, when these smaller nations call for a tougher policy towards Russia and demand take extreme measures against us, including the deployment of troops and so on, they only do that because they know they won't have to face the consequences of their provocative rhetoric. As for the ones who do, they behave in a much more restrained manner, and rightly so.
And all that fuss with Germany's Taurus missiles that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said they won't supply. There are forces that insist on supplying Taurus to Ukraine. The British came up with the initiative to supply Taurus missiles through the UK. They are ready to arrange the transit. The target is the Crimean Bridge. German generals are already planning operations there, as we've heard, not only against the Crimean Bridge, but against military bases deeper inside the Russian territory. Somebody already says that those missiles may be used to strike the Kremlin. Aren't they getting carried away in their dreams?
First, it's pipe dreams and wishful thinking on their part. Second, they are trying to intimidate us. As for Germany, there are constitutional implications for them in this as well. They are asking quite rightly, what if those Tauruses hit the part of the Crimean Bridge that is undoubtedly, even in their own books, Russian territory? That would be a violation of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Germany. The thing is, the opposition in Germany is even more aggressive. Let's see where their mouth gets them. We are keeping an eye on that. They already use those British and US-made missiles, but that doesn't change the situation on the battlefield much. Yes, they inflict certain damage, obviously, but that doesn't change the course of the hostilities and the consequences that inevitably befall the opposing party. We've been hearing a lot on Russian channels, international channels, and German channels as well, about how many assets in Germany are out of order or require updates, repairs, and so on. Let them keep working. As you rightly said, there are things they must think, stop, and think about. The smarter ones among them will stop and start thinking.
And what about the new NATO members, Finland and Sweden? What is their bargain here? Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström recently told the Turks that Sweden is opposed to having NATO bases on its territory. Didn't they know the kind of club they were joining? What's happening to them?
You should ask them. I have no idea. We used to have fairly positive and stable relations with these two countries, and I think that they gained more from being neutral because it gave them certain advantages. At the very least, they could offer a negotiating platform to ease tensions in Europe. We used to have an ideal relationship with Finland, simply ideal. We never had a single dispute, not territorial, not otherwise. We didn't even have any troops at the border with Finland. We moved them all out. Why did they choose to do what they did? In my opinion, it's purely for political reasons. They probably wanted to become members of the Western Club, to get under some kind of umbrella. What do they gain from that? Frankly speaking, I don't know. It is an absolutely nonsensical move from the viewpoint of ensuring their own national interests. Anyway, it's up to them. It was their decision. We didn't have troops on that border before, but now we will. We didn't have weapon systems there, but now we will. And for what? Economically, we were on very good terms. They tapped into our market, and in turn, we bought a lot of goods from them. What's wrong with that? But now things are going to change. Many of their goods aren't really sought after in other markets, and our markets have to compensate as well. I don't understand. You know, it's a trivial thing, but nevertheless, in recent years, both in Helsinki and especially in the border areas of Finland, they accepted Russian rubles. Yes, even in Helsinki, in major supermarkets, you could buy whatever goods you wanted for rubles. There were advertisements in Russian all over the place.
Now their border regions are going bankrupt.
Yes, but I wanted to make a different point. Let's look at their side of the border. Economically, it was doing very well. Real estate prices were solid. Economically, they were doing great, but apparently there were forces in Finland that were, well, overly right-wing, overly conservative, nationalist even, that didn't like that. They disliked building these closer ties with Russia. Some thought it was going too far. Why are these Russians buying houses on our land, buying apartments? And why is everything now suddenly in Russian? So I think, no, I know there was this nascent anti-Russian sentiment growing at the individual level. It could be that some political forces inside the country decided to take advantage of that bias. It very well could be. All these factors combined led to Finland's decision. That's what I think, but I'm not 100% sure, of course. In any case, their decision certainly does not help in terms of security, both bilaterally between Russia and Finland, and in Europe as a whole.
In the meantime, the presidential campaign is in full swing in the United States, and you seem to be a factor there. Invisibly, you are there, as every candidate, Democrat or Republican alike, mentions you in their speeches and arguments. In fact, the impression is you are everywhere in newspaper and TV news headlines there, an argument in everyone's electoral campaign. Besides, it seems like you are adding fuel to that fire by saying that one of the candidates is preferable for us. Well, if the president of a foreign country says that a candidate in another country is preferable, then is it a classic case of election meddling? To what degree you think you're influencing America's elections by saying that Biden is more desirable to you? Is it trolling or something else?
Let me tell you one thing that will show that my preferences here haven't changed. We are not interfering in any elections. As I have said many times, we will work with any leader that the American people, American voters elect. What is curious, though, is that in the last year of his tenure, President Trump, now a presidential candidate, reproached me for sympathizing with Biden. Over 4 years ago, he told me during one of our conversations, excuse me, but I'm quoting him directly here, "You want Sleepy Joe to win." He told me that when he was president. Later, though, much to my surprise, he was prosecuted because we had allegedly supported him as the candidate. Well, that's utter nonsense. As for today's election situation, it's getting more and more uncivilized. I'd like to refrain from giving any comments on the matter. I think it's obvious to anyone now that the U.S. political system cannot claim to be democratic in all senses of the word.
Actually, to be honest, your preference for Biden looks strange to me. After all, in 2011, Biden flew to Moscow to try and talk you out of running for another presidency. Do you remember? He told about that during his meeting with Russia's opposition in the Spaso House. Gary Kasparov wrote about that later, how Biden had come to the then Prime Minister Putin in his Moscow White House office to talk to him out of running for president, threatening to stage an Arab Spring in Russia otherwise. That is, Biden wasn't a big fan of yours even back then. It's like a historical enmity between you two, right?
Honestly, I didn't pay much attention there.
You didn't even pay much attention?
There is no enmity.
So it was serious to him, but not to you?
Well, this exactly classifies as intervention in our domestic internal policy matters. And as we have said many times, and I said many times, we will not allow anyone to do that.
Well, if we step away from election meddling, the escalation still continues. It looks as if the two superpowers, Russia and the U.S., are playing what is called chicken game in America. It's a game when two guys put their cars in a collision course, and the first one to swerve loses. Looks like nobody's swerving first this time. Is collision inevitable?
The USA announced recently it's not going to send troops. We know what American troops on the Russian territory means. It means intervention, and this is how we are going to treat it. even if they show up on the territory of Ukraine. They understand it. I said that Biden was a man of the traditional school of politics, and we see proof of that. Besides Biden, they have plenty of other experts in Russian-American relations and strategic deterrence. So I don't think we're on a collision course, but we are ready for that as well. I've said many times that to us it's a matter of life and death. To them it's a matter of improving their tactical standing globally and in Europe in particular. It's a matter of retaining their status among their allies. It's important, but not as important as it is to us.
You say we are ready for this. Philosopher Alexander Dugin, an expert in geopolitics, directly calls for everyone to prepare for a nuclear war, saying that the more prepared we are, the lower the chances of it happening. Can one be prepared for it at all? Are we really ready for a nuclear war?
From the military and political standpoint, we are, of course. Our nuclear assets are always on constant alert. That's one thing. The second thing is that our nuclear triad is more advanced than any other one. In fact, there are only two such triads, ours and America's. And we are more advanced in this respect. Our nuclear component is more advanced. While we are more or less at par in terms of warhead and missile numbers, ours are more advanced. It is a known fact in the expert community. That doesn't mean we have to compete who has more missiles and warheads. Those who need to know, experts, specialists, the military, they know. The Americans now strive to advance their weapons and make new ones. There is a plan in place for that. And we know that. They are updating all their components, and so are we. It doesn't mean, though, that they are ready to unleash a nuclear war tomorrow. Well, if they are, then what can we do? We are ready.
Maybe Russia should conduct a nuclear test at some moment, just to drive the point home. After all, there are no international restrictions against that.
There is a treaty on banning such tests, but sadly, the United States never ratified it. So to ensure parity in this regard, we revoked our ratification as well. Since the treaty was never ratified by the US, it never came into effect due to an insufficient number of ratifications, although we still adhere to its terms. We know, however, that the United States contemplates the possibility of conducting such tests. The reason for that? The reason is that when new warheads are developed, testing them in computer simulations is not enough. Some experts think. So a real test explosion is required. In certain circles in the US, such ideas do have a place. We know about that, and we are watching. If they conduct such a test, I don't rule out, not necessarily, as we still have to think whether we need it or not. I don't rule out the possibility of us doing the same.
Are we ready for that technically?
We always are. I want to make it clear. Those are not your conventional weapons. It's a branch of our armed forces that's on permanent combat alert.